Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Touchdown Tuesday, the official football podcast of Brew Sports. I am Ian DeMars alongside Ryan Salman. And Ryan, we have a special guest with us here today. Joining us from Knock Money Football is Ellie McNanny himself. Ellie, welcome to the show. Are you excited to be on this week?
Yeah, Ian, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation tonight.
All right, awesome.
Had a good time too, and we just had the divisional playoffs, and there's a lot of topics to go over.
Yeah, and a great end to the week.
Definitely for sure on that for both of us. So let's get a quick start here. Let's obviously we had the 4 big divisional playoff games this past week. We saw the Chiefs get a dominant win at home over the Indianapolis Colts. We saw a closer Saturday night game between the Los Angeles Rams and the Dallas Cowboys, where we saw the Rams dominate that game via the run with C.J. Anderson and Todd Gurley. And then in the Sunday game, we saw the New England Patriots dominate the Los Angeles Chargers in a cold game up in New England. And then in the final game of divisional week, we saw the New Orleans Saints come from behind in that game to top the Nick Foles-led Philadelphia Eagles. So let's first start talking about the Chiefs and the Colts. The Chiefs, we didn't really know what to expect from them. They've kind of struggled in the playoffs over the last few years, and Patrick Mahomes and that offense just got off to a dynamic start. After seeing what they did against the Colts, which had been playing some of the best football in the league, do you think that this Chiefs team is a legit threat to actually win it all now?
You can take this one first, Ellie.
Perfect. Yeah, and I do, because you look at what the Chiefs have been able to do on offense, and the offense all season has been the story. But at least for this game, the defense was able to hold Andrew Luck and the Colts down to a low total of points throughout the game and let the offense go to work over and over again. The pass rush was getting in there. Justin Houston was tremendous. And so I look at this Chiefs team now coming around at the end of the season and starting to be a more complete team. That's what they're going to need to be if they're going to beat the Patriots this week.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And if you look at their matchup that they had earlier in the year in Foxborough, that game was really close. And even though the Chiefs got off to a terrible start, they ended up making a game of it, and they actually almost came back and won. And you bring up a really good point, Ellie, with their defense. That defense is probably a little underrated just because of how often they're on the field with how quickly the offense scores. So a lot of the numbers that are put up against them probably aren't put up against them if the offense is only scoring like 20 points a game. But when that offense puts up such big totals, they get some numbers put up on them too. If you look at their personnel on the defense, they have Dee Ford, who's had a really solid season. Anthony Hitchens had, I think it was 7 tackles in the game against the Colts. And Justin Houston, like you said, is a bona fide all-star on that D-line. So just looking at the Chiefs, they seem like they're the whole package. Even without Kareem Hunt, I think they have a fighting chance versus the Pats.
But you think about it, why is that defense so underrated, right? It's because the game that a lot of people watched during the regular season was Chiefs-Rams, where they gave up 54 points. And so everybody thinks of the Chiefs, and they go back to that one game. Now they're starting to get into a little bit of a rhythm. They're starting to get into a groove. And one of the big knocks on Patrick Mahomes this year was, he can't win big games against other top-tier quarterbacks. Well, he just beat Andrew Luck in the playoffs.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because that's been the issue with the Chiefs. I would say this century, you could even look at it. When Trent Green was the quarterback and then Alex Smith over these last few years, they've had the quarterbacks that can put up some decent numbers. It's just a matter of how can these quarterbacks perform for them in the playoffs. And Patrick Mahomes, for being such a young quarterback, definitely has more talent than both those quarterbacks. And you could definitely see, even despite playing in some tough weather yesterday in Kansas City, he was able to play through all that and just put up a phenomenal game. I mean, he did go for a touchdown in the game, which was surprising since he threw for 50 touchdowns during the season. But they were able to take control of that game, because when you play in those type of games where it's hard to basically throw the ball, you have to rely on the run. And the fact that that team scored 4 rushing touchdowns just tells you that this team seems like they're a complete team. And the defense played like it yesterday. That's because the majority of the year they haven't looked like that for the most part defensively.
So it sounds like we're all pretty high on the Chiefs and we think they have a chance. But let's talk about who they're playing. So this is the Patriots. The Patriots that everybody said were dead halfway through the season because they had a couple strange losses like they always do back in October and even November. And now this team, judging by the first playoff game, against a Chargers team that a lot of people picked at not only beat the Patriots, but also contend for the Super Bowl this year. They look like they're back in form. And they are going to Arrowhead to play the Chiefs, which will be a little bit tougher. But if you look at the playoffs and who has the experience, you have to think that the Patriots are in great shape, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think you also get into the question of how can Andy Reid keep this going in the playoffs? That's always been the big knock on him. And if you're looking at these two teams and you've got a young, I mean, he's a sophomore quarterback, but he's really a rookie. This is his first year as a full-time starter, Mahomes. And then a guy like Andy Reid, who, like I said, the knock on him has been the playoffs, versus Brady and Belichick, the choice is clear.
Yeah, I would definitely make a good case for that, but I've just noticed, at least over these last few years, whenever it comes to a conference championship game and it's not in New England, we tend to see this Patriots team get off to somewhat slower starts that causes them to struggle to get back into the game. And going to Kansas City, which is one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL, I think that could be a big threat to them early on in the game. It's going to be really hyped there. And Patrick Mahomes, we haven't really seen this guy get off to a slow start this year. And we saw what he did against the Patriots earlier this year. I mean, it was their first loss of the year, but he didn't even put up that bad of numbers, and he hasn't really put up that bad of numbers this whole year. I mean, you look at this past week, you could say was probably his worst statistical game of the year with not throwing a touchdown. But I do think that despite the Patriots, I would say probably could be the favorites this week. I think that they should be a little bit worried going on the road with their most recent history of conference or championship games on the road.
Let me ask you this to both of you guys. Do you think the fact that Kareem Hunt isn't playing for the Chiefs anymore and they've had Damian Williams filling in, do you think that's a factor at all? I mean, Damian Williams has been really successful filling in, but do you think there's a drop-off there?
Here's my honest thought on the Kareem Hunt situation. I think there was an opportunity for that to really hamper the Chiefs' season and sort of get in their head, and that was the Ravens game. You remember that the Ravens, for most of the game, were shutting down the Chiefs relative to what they usually score. But near the end of the game, Patrick Mahomes makes that crazy throw across his body to Tyreek Hill. They end up winning the game. I think it was either at the end of regulation or in overtime. And I think after that, you start to see the Chiefs become confident with the guys that they had on their roster on the field. I really look back, and I believe if they had lost that game, it might have been a much different story, and they might have started to really feel like, oh, we've lost Kareem Hunt, we've lost our mojo. But I don't think that's the case now.
Yeah, and
go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, if you look at it, that game was definitely a big turning point of the season for them, because I believe Spencer Ware was still basically he became the number one back, obviously, after the whole Hunt situation. But that was the start of the when we saw Damian Williams kind of take over and show that he has that play to mention where he can not only run the ball but catch the ball out of the backfield, which is something that we can kind of don't see much from Spencer, where obviously he can pound it up the middle when he gets touches, but he's not really known for catching the ball out of the backfield. And Damian Williams, we've seen him do some of this when he was with the Miami Dolphins. And it seems like they haven't really lost that much, if anything, with him entering now. I feel like if they would have kept Spencer Ware there, then they would have stepped back a little bit, and we could have seen some struggles for them. Remember,
too, is the fact that this is the Patrick Mahomes show now. So if you're looking at this team last year with Alex Smith at quarterback, where they're running more of a ground and pound offense as opposed to an aerial assault, I think you see this hampering them a little bit more. But I think the fact that defensive schemes, when they play the Chiefs, are so focused on stopping Patrick Mahomes, I think Damian Williams and the running game in general kind of fly a little bit under the radar, to be honest.
Well, I think they're focused on stopping Mahomes, but they're also focused on, and this is obviously part of Mahomes, they're trying to stop Tyreek Hill on the perimeter. And so when you're able to stretch the defense that way, it opens up those holes kind of in the middle of the field, and you're able to establish I know it's kind of become a joke on Twitter of the whole establishing the run thing, but I think it's a real thing. You got to establish the run and also get the ball to the tight end, and Travis Kelce, I think, broke 100 yards in this game.
Yeah, and then we also saw when you put those types of coverages on Tyreek Hill, and then we see Kelce get open. We see other guys who are big playmakers for that team do work too. Look at Sammy Watkins, who's been up and down this whole year. He had one of his better games of the year this past week. I believe he had 6 catches in the game. So that just tells you that they have enough dynamic players on that team that they're able to spread the field open up the middle, and then they're able to just find success wherever they go.
So if you guys had to pick this upcoming game, what would you guys say? Are you on the Chiefs bandwagon or are you going Patriots?
I'll tell you, from a pure football standpoint, if you're just watching the tape and you weren't concerned with any of the external factors, it's the Chiefs without a question. They're playing better football right now. They're able to do so many things, so many different dimensions on offense. But I'm not going to be the one who's going to bet against Brady and Belichick in January or frankly February if they get there. So I still think it's the Patriots right now. You know, they go into halftime with a team that was arguably comparable to the Chiefs this year, the Chargers, who were neck and neck with them in the AFC West. And at halftime, they were on pace to put up 70 points. So I think if there are a few teams in this league that can go into kind of a shootout with the Chiefs and win, it's the Patriots, and they've shown you this now. I'm picking the Patriots.
Yeah, I definitely make a good case there for the Patriots. Obviously, you could say they've been the best team, obviously, since Tom Brady's been there. So obviously, that gives them an edge at just right there. And then you look at the Chiefs, you don't really see too many players on that team that have big time game experiences, either in a conference championship game or even a Super Bowl. But something just seems different about this team. And I'm not sure if it's Patrick Mahomes or if it's the fact that we're seeing some of these guys get a restart with new teams like Sammy Watkins and Damian Williams. And the fact that their defense played phenomenal this past week without, I don't believe Eric Berry even played this week, and he's one of their most dynamic defenders. I think just seeing some of this, I would say right now, I'm saying the Chiefs would be the team right now. But obviously, we see some things happen during the week. Injuries could play a factor. But if I'm picking right now, I think the Chiefs just have something that's going to stand out, that's going to give them the win this upcoming week.
Okay. So I think that you remember at the start of the year, I picked the Patriots to get to the Super Bowl. I'm not going to change my tune on that now. But I get the feeling that at some point during the year, Bill Belichick deliberately calls a game and says that they're going to lose it just so that they have some bulletin board material later on in the season. So I get a feeling that team listened to when people said they were done, listened to when they said Brady was going to fall off the cliff. And I think they're using all of that as fuel to propel themselves back to the Super Bowl. And I think taking care of Patrick Mahomes, the guy that's probably going to be Offensive Player of the Year or MVP, is going to be enough for them to want to really have a good showing here. I think the Patriots are going to win.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I mean, Ryan, you did pick them last year. You picked them again this year, and they're showing you why they're always one of the favorites every year. But let's touch a little bit. I do want to touch one thing about the Patriots-Chargers game. Obviously, Philip Rivers has had one of his best seasons since being in the NFL, and being that he is getting up there, do you guys think that he's going to end his career after this year? Or do you think he sticks it out for another year?
Well, I think your heart breaks for Philip Rivers that once again gets into the playoffs. And I mean, this time it was the Patriots. It's been the Patriots in the past, but just can't get it done. And you start to compare Philip Rivers to those other quarterbacks from his class. Eli Manning's won 2 Super Bowls. Ben Roethlisberger has won at least one, I think 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah, 2.
And he hasn't won the big one. So I think there's that motivation for him to come back. Maybe next year will be the year. Maybe we'll do it this time. And I don't know that that'll be the case, but at the same time, I can't imagine he walks away now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he finally has a team around him that has a good enough supporting cast that he could potentially see making a Super Bowl run in the next 2 years. So if you look at the other players from his class, like you mentioned too, they haven't fallen off the cliff yet either. Ben Roethlisberger is still playing at a relatively high level. Eli Manning, we're not really sure about. He'll probably end up somewhere where he can still compete at a relatively high level at least. I don't think Philip Rivers is going to be done yet, especially when his team around him, like I said, is so much better than it's been in years past.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of Philip Rivers since he's come to the league, and I think he has some of the most talented players around him that he's had since being in the league. You look at, he's had some injuries to overcome this year, with Joey Bosa missing a decent part of the beginning of the year. He had Melvin Gordon missed a decent chunk of the year. Keenan Allen finally played a full healthy year, Hunter Henry basically missed all of the year until this past week due to the ACL injury. If they can keep all their young talent healthy, and then we continue to see strides from Mike Williams, who we saw play great down the stretch, this team definitely has all the tools to get far into the playoffs. It's just a matter of can they keep it all together for a season so that they can get a higher seed and possibly advance. That's the key for them.
Every time you talk about Hunter Henry, I just think of Stephen A. Smith completely butchering who was playing for the Chargers and the Chiefs in that game. But anyway, let's flip over to the NFC and discuss those games a little bit. So those games were much closer overall. You saw the Cowboys losing to the Rams by 8 points, and you saw the Saints eventually taking care of the Eagles in what was a closely contested game. These were a little bit more of a knockdown slugfest type atmosphere in both of these games. What stood out to you guys the most? Ellie, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned that the Cowboys-Rams game was close, and yeah, by the final score it was 30-22. They won by a score. But the game wasn't really that close throughout. It's kind of unfortunate for a Dallas team that is so incredibly well built that once again they weren't able to do it. I saw a thing, it was either Fox Sports or NBC Sports or one of the major media network Twitter accounts posted a thing where I think 13 of the 16 teams in the NFC have made a championship game in the NFC since the Cowboys last made it to that game. And so you think about the Cowboys going forward, maybe next year will be their year, it finally all comes together. But once again, they're not able to get there. And so I look at the Rams now as a team where I don't know if it's as much them winning or the Cowboys losing this game, but disappointing end to the season for Dallas.
Yeah, you'll look at it, and obviously when Dallas made the move to get Amari Cooper, not many people knew what it was going to do to the team just because they were in a funk at the beginning of the year. But he turned that team around. That offense started taking off. There were rumors that Dak Prescott might not be the guy for that team. We're not really sure if he still is, but that team took off when you put another playmaker on the field in Amari Cooper. And you look in the playoff, you look in the game, he put up some good numbers, but that defense just got lost after they've been playing so well down the stretch. I mean, they gave up over 100 yards to two different guys, one of them being a guy that was signed, 3 weeks ago? And he had 2 touchdowns in the game. So,
yeah, how about the resurgence of C.J. Anderson? I think that's another topic that is going to get lost here, but has really helped propel the Rams a little bit, especially as Gurley has been dealing with a little bit of some injury stuff near the end of the year.
Yeah, it was definitely a huge signing, and I was a huge fan of it because C.J. Anderson, when he got let go by the Broncos, it wasn't necessarily a surprising move, but this guy still has RB1 potential on any team in the league. So the fact that he was able to come
in. Bounced around. He would bounce around the league after that. I think he was even on the Raiders and got cut by the Raiders.
I think he was on the Panthers for a minute, too. I could be wrong.
Yeah, he was everywhere, and none of these teams saw anything in him after being a starting running back for Denver, and then all of a sudden he has this kind of game.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to see that happen. You could say at this point, if he puts up another decent game this upcoming week, that some team's going to offer him a good chunk of change this offseason. Who knows, maybe even the Rams offer him some money to be a backup going forward. But the fact that Jared Goff didn't necessarily have a huge game by any standards, but I kind of agree on the point that I'm not sure if the Rams won this game, but Dallas lost this game, and that was because of the fact that that defense just went somewhere and gave up over 200 yards, something that we haven't seen in a while because this team's put up some great numbers defensively against running backs. We saw what they did last week against Seattle. They're one of the best rushing teams in the league, and they got shut down. Chris Carson struggled, and we saw what they did earlier in the year against the Saints where they were able to stop them. So I'm not sure what's going to happen going forward. There are reports that they could possibly lose their D coordinator. I know he's been favored to land a coaching job. Not sure if he will get any. But the Cowboys, they had the opportunities, but they just fell flat in this game. Unfortunately, that's
What's weird about the Cowboys too is I was, born in the 90s, so I still even remember those great 90s Cowboys teams when they were winning so many Super Bowls. And now from there to get to here, it's like, how did this happen where now the Cowboys are basically choke artists in the playoffs? I mean, I remember some of the last times the Cowboys were in the playoffs, you had the Tony Romo botched snap, you had the Dez didn't catch it game, and now you have this where the Cowboys got beat at their own game by the Rams. Like, it was supposed to be Ezekiel Elliott running the ball down the Rams' throat and that defense playing stout and stopping the Rams' offense. It was completely the other way around, and it wasn't even Todd Gurley. Like you said, it was C.J. Anderson. I mean, on some level, even though C.J. Anderson had a great performance, that's just embarrassing by the Cowboys.
Yeah, and I think the worst part about that is for Dallas is that they haven't been an awful team at any point. There's been no point where you're thinking, oh, we've really got to blow this up and start over since Tony Romo took over as the quarterback however many years ago it was. And so they've been an 8-8 caliber team for the last decade. And there's going to be some slight variance in there from 6-10 to 10-6, but you're never in that elite echelon of teams. And I don't know that you're going to get there with Dak Prescott at quarterback.
Yeah, I don't think that they are. They got sort of fooled, I think, by the fact that he was so good as a rookie when he took over. And I think we're just seeing rookies more ready for the NFL now than we ever have before. And I think we're seeing defenses not ready for some of these players coming in because they don't assume that they have to really do a whole lot to stop them. I mean, you've seen it with Baker Mayfield. You saw with Sam Darnold this first game. And I think that Dak Prescott took a lot of teams by surprise his first year, and you had the benefit of a great offensive line and Ezekiel Elliott. I think that success sort of fooled them into thinking that they had a guy that could take this franchise to the Super Bowl, and I don't really think he's capable of it because every time we saw him with the ball in his hands and Ezekiel Elliott not having great success running the ball, you saw him struggle a lot.
And I think – sorry, go ahead, Ellie.
I was just going to say, here's another theory for you on why a guy like Dak Prescott is able to have that much success. I think the NFL has become such a reactionary league in terms of basing all of your game plans on tape. What kind of film do you have on every player who's on the other team? And when these rookie quarterbacks come in or young quarterbacks come in, you don't have that much tape. You don't know their tendencies as well. I think when some of these defenses get back to just, we're going to play our game and we're going to win at what we're good at, you're going to see a lot of these rookie quarterbacks not have as much success. And so I think that's why teams, for example, like the Patriots, who know what they do well and they're just going to do it and exploit it, and however you play against us, we're going to win. It's a stark difference than some of these other teams that aren't able to handle these guys they don't have the film on.
Yeah, and I think a key thing that I noticed this year from Dak Prescott that I could tell was a difference right away over the last couple of years was that he didn't have his security blanket with him and Jason Witten. Jason Witten was a guy he could rely on in a lot of situations, whether it be third down or just trying to get rid of the ball. And you look at some of the tight ends they have in that team, Blake Jarwin, Rico Gathers, I think there's another one in there. I can't remember his name, but we really didn't see him get gel with any one of those tight ends. We did see a little bit with Jarwin towards the end of the season, but I think that was the key for them. He didn't have that tight end he could rely on, whether, like I said, it was in the passing game, obviously, or even in run blocking for the most part. So I think that was the key difference for Dak Prescott this year. And we could tell right away that just at the beginning of the year that this guy was different. And I think Jason Witten was the difference maker for him.
Yeah, Jarwin put up like 3-4 touchdowns in Week 17 against the Giants.
Yeah, he did. It was looking good for him for a minute there, but that's about it. Let's touch real quick on Saints-Eagles and then get into some picks because we have a lot of stuff to keep moving down. Let me get the first thought in on this Saints-Eagles game. I honestly think that the Eagles management is somewhat relieved that Nick Foles didn't take them to another Super Bowl because now I think they can put to rest once again the Carson Wentz versus Nick Foles debate because you saw Nick Foles' stat line in this game. He had 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, QBR of just 49.6. I think they're going to go back to Carson Wentz now, and they can get rid of Nick Foles and not pay him the money that he's going to be owed pretty much this year with a clean conscience, not wondering what could have been. So I think in some ways this might actually be good for the Eagles long term if they're planning on sticking with Wentz.
Yeah, and I think on the other side, you look at the Saints now. What a gutsy comeback for them to do that after being down 14-0. Because when that happened, there was a lot of talk on Twitter, and even the announcers were saying it. okay, so what happens now? Nick Foles, what if he wins here? What if he wins the championship? What if, he gets to the Super Bowl? And I think you look at it now from a management perspective. What do we do with Nick Foles after he loses in the divisional round is a much different conversation than, oh no, what do we do? He's holding the Lombardi Trophy again, and this is his team.
Yeah, and I mean, Ryan and I, we debated on this topic last week, and Ryan was the one who was hugely in favor of the Eagles sticking with Nick Foles going forward.
I still think they should, but I think their management in no way wants to. I think that Nick Foles proved that for some reason he and this Eagles team gelled together incredibly well. And we were talking about it before we went on air. There's just some ineffable quality about Nick Foles playing in that lineup that makes their defense and the rest of their team play better than they do with Carson Wentz.
You know what intrigues me more from a management perspective, whether it's Foles or Wentz, and I frankly think they're comparable quarterbacks, at least from the Eagles' perspective. Think about the compensation package you can get for Wentz now in a trade. That's probably a first-rounder this year, possibly a first-rounder next year, and maybe even a little bit more. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, especially look at what the Sam Bradford trade went for. I think he got a first-round pick for his services, and I think he was immediately injured, paving the way for Case Keenum. Carson Wentz is going to command a lot on the trade market if that's the direction they want to go. And the Eagles could continue to build this young roster of a bunch of guys on the rookie contracts and be right back in this position next year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you trade either one of these quarterbacks, I think the way Nick Foles has played over these last couple of years in the postseason, you're gonna get a good return either way. Obviously, with Carson Wentz, because of the potential upside you could see from him, you can get a lot back. Obviously, we've touched on that the injury history could play a key factor, but this guy's still a young quarterback, so you'd be willing to give up some assets in order to get a possible franchise quarterback for your team. And then Nick Foles, remember, this guy was on the verge of retiring, and now this guy could be a potential big moneymaker for a different team, possibly, if he and the Eagles don't agree on or extending his contract. So either way in this situation, I think the Eagles win because they're going to get some good sort of compensation in this. And yeah, Nick Foles didn't necessarily have his best game this week. Got off to a great start in the first half, but I want to give hats off to the defense in this game for the Saints. After that rough start, they dominated the rest of the game. They forced pressure on Nick Foles. They forced him to make some bad choices. And they're starting to show signs of what we saw at points during the year where people thought this could be a Super Bowl team. And at this point, they could be the Super Bowl team that represents the NFC East, or the NFC, I should say. I'm not sure, but they made huge strides this week.
So let's go with picks for that upcoming NFC Championship game, then Saints-Rams. I actually want to hear two answers from you guys. I want to hear which quarterback the Eagles are going to be sticking with next year and who you think is going to win that championship game.
So I'll start with the Eagles quarterback. I think as much as it might be a good management decision to go see what you can get for Wentz, Foles did not get far enough in the playoffs to justify keeping him at this point. See what you can get for him on the open market, or at least just decline to pay the salary that he's due at this point when you've already got a guy like Wentz on the roster. I think the Eagles stick with Wentz. They go with their first-round pick, and Foles ends up taking snaps for another team at the start of the 2019 season. As to the game coming up, this is an easier pick for me than the other one. I think it's the Saints all the way. And I know I'm picking the more experienced quarterback here, but I think it matters. I don't know that I fully trust Jared Goff yet. There were a lot of games this season where it looked like he wasn't fully in control of the game. And while the Rams have a loaded roster up and down, the Saints are just as loaded at each position. And Marshawn Lattimore is every bit the lockdown corner the Saints need him to be, and he showed that in this game.
Yeah, I'll touch first on the Eagles quarterback situation. I like both the quarterbacks on the team. I was a huge fan of Nick Foles during his first run with the Eagles. And then obviously I was a big fan of Carson Wentz when he came into the league. I've seen what he can do. This guy can do a lot with the ball, and he's an underrated runner that people don't talk about. I just think that you have to stick with Carson Wentz. obviously there's the injury history that he has. He's had it throughout college, not just in the NFL. But Nick Foles, obviously, like I've talked about it before, Nick Foles has played great in the postseason and could possibly be better in the postseason than Carson Wentz could ever be at this point. However, you can't really say Nick Foles can be your guy until you see him for a full season. We've only seen him at periods throughout the season, whether it be beginning part, later part, or whatever. We haven't seen him really play a full season, basically his whole career. Maybe even the year where he threw 7 touchdowns in a game. I believe he wasn't even the full-year quarterback for the Eagles then. So until we can see him play a full year, you can't say that he's going to be our guy going forward. So I think that they have to go with Wentz just because he's younger. I think he has more upside. And I think that right now, like, Foles is going to get you something good in a trade. Now, looking at this upcoming game between the Rams and the Saints, I'm still picking the Rams here. I picked them at the beginning of the year to get to the Super Bowl. I picked them at the beginning of the playoffs to get to the Super Bowl, so I'm not changing my mind here. The reason why I'm saying the Rams is because we've seen what they can – we've seen times where this team is the best in the NFL. We've seen times where this offense has been dynamic. And they have some solid playmakers on defense. We've seen them struggle on defense at points this year. But let's remember, they played New Orleans this year, and they played them in the Superdome. So they know how to adjust in that game. They played that game close throughout, and they weren't able to come through to get the win. I think they're going to come in. They know what to expect. I think they get revenge. I think they get to the Super Bowl. It's going to be a high-scoring game like it was the first time. But I think that they get revenge in advance.
Fair point on that. I'm going to go with Carson Wentz as the Eagles quarterback next year for the reasons you guys both mentioned. But I'm going to go with the Rams simply because I picked them to start the year as the Super Bowl representative from the NFC, and it would just be a shame to turn away from that now. I'm going with Patriots in the AFC and Rams in the NFC. But let's talk about some coaching news that happened since our last podcast. So there's been a bunch of new hires since we last talked. You have Nick Mangio with the Broncos, Freddie Kitchens with the Browns, Adam Gase to the Jets, staying in the division, Bruce Arians to the Buccaneers. So out of these hires, which ones are most interesting to you guys?
Ellie, I'll let you start off first.
Yeah, I just absolutely love Bruce Arians going to the Buccaneers. I remember he said something about the only way he'd come out of retirement for coaching is if it was the Browns job. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and I think the Buccaneers get a really talented leader who is already building one of the premier coaching staffs in the NFL. If you're going to compete in a division that has the Saints, the Panthers, who were a little bit down this year but have a tremendous roster, and the Falcons, who also you can never count out with Matt Ryan to Julio Jones, it's going to take a guy like Bruce Arians. And so that's just my favorite pick far and away. On the other side of it, however, I look at a guy like Cliff Kingsbury going to the Cardinals, and I'm not so sure this is the best move. Now, whether he sticks with Josh Rosen or he takes a guy like Kyler Murray first in the draft, as some have rumored that he's leaning toward, I'm just worried that some teams are taking this whole Sean McVay is succeeding with the Rams thing a step or two far. So you look at a guy like Matt LaFleur getting the job with the Packers. This is kind of another example of this, but I think to a lesser extent because he has real coaching experience at the offensive coordinator level. Cliff Kingsbury wasn't able to win at Texas Tech. And so I wonder now that bringing in kind of a young quarterback guru just to develop the quarterback is really the best strategy. We always talk about the NFL as a copycat league, like it's a great thing. But a lot of times teams try to jump on the bandwagon after something has succeeded. It's like a flash in the pan. I remember the Wildcat offense with Tony Sparano and the Dolphins back however many years ago, and the NFL became a copycat league about it, and it quickly fizzled out. So, like I said, I think we're taking it a step too far, and a hire like Kingsbury, or if the Bengals, and I think we're going to talk about the Bengals, end up going through and hiring Zach Taylor, the quarterback's coach of the Rams, to be their new head coach, I just have some concerns.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with you right away talking about Cliff Kingsbury. Watching him at Texas Tech, I love his dynamics on offense. Obviously, Big 12 is a great offensive conference. But looking at some of the stats from Texas Tech, despite putting up huge numbers, you have to remember they weren't necessarily the highest scoring team in the Big 12. This team was like mid-pack scoring wise, and that's because they had a terrible defense. So as much as you can't necessarily put all the blame on Kingsbury, you have to put part of the blame on him because they're not making plays defensively. He has an under 500 record career-wise at Texas Tech. They've never won a conference championship at Texas Tech. Yes, he's developed some great quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield when he was there for a year. And we saw what he did with Johnny Manziel when he was at Texas A&M. But remember, he didn't even get a head coaching job after he got fired by Texas Tech. He set up for an offensive coordinator job at USC, which was surprising because I don't know if I'd say surprising. It was when I saw the news, I was a little bit shocked by it, just because USC, you kind of figured they're in a hot spot this year. So you put a guy who just got fired as a head coach as your OC, I think puts more pressure on that team in general. And then the fact that they were trying to keep him from coming to the NFL kind of made you worry that, well, you want to what? I think they were set up to do this. If Cliff Kingsbury if he would have stayed at USC and USC had another bad year, I think they would have fired Clay Helton and they would have promoted Kingsbury to be the head coach. I think that's what they were intending to do. I think that's what they wanted to do if they had a bad year. But now we see this whole situation, him coming to the NFL. It's kind of confusing because you look at the Cardinals now, they have some playmakers on offense. They still have David Johnson. You have Josh Rosen, who I think still can be a very valuable quarterback in this league. Larry Fitzgerald could be coming back. We're not really sure yet. But the fact that they hired a guy that had a losing record, couldn't win in his conference, and wasn't even necessarily the best offensive coach in there, just tells you that I think the Cardinals, obviously, yeah, they're looking for the next Sean McVay because Sean McVay's in their division. But we've also seen some of these teams try doing that and haven't really worked out to us. So I do agree with you on that point where the NFL tries to go with the trend for a couple years, and then we see it like go away for however long.
So, before you finish, I just want to add something to the conversation here. So we're going to talk about Kyler Murray. So you guys are on the Cliff Kingsbury talk right now. He was cited as saying that if he were drafting number 1 overall, he would take Kyler Murray. So he was endorsing Kyler Murray before he was the head coach of the Cardinals. Do you guys think that has anything to do with like this whole situation? So the fact that he gets hired, the fact that Kyler Murray seems like he's coming into the NFL draft, do you think there's any sort of correlation there? Or do you think this is all just happenstance?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he said it back in October, and there's a massive difference between being on an interview and saying, you know, I have really great respect for this guy. I think he said something along the lines of, you know, Kyler's a freak. I would take him at number 1. And that's a really nice thing to say about a young man who is making a decision between football and baseball. It's quite another thing to come in and your first NFL head coaching job, use the first overall pick, your first ever first-round pick, on a player who is, you know, we got to talk about it, shorter really than any other quarterback in recent memory, and has a very different sort of skill set than we've ever seen be successful in the NFL. Not to say it's impossible, but it's definitely a hurdle you've got to clear. And I think you've got to be really confident in your ability as a coach, in your offensive coordinating staff, and the players that you have around that guy to do that. So I worry about whether or not all this hype right now about Cliff Kingsbury said this one thing back in October. He's going to use the first pick. It's quite a different thing to actually do it. And so I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, and then you look at the whole situation. Yeah, that he did make those comments, but that was also after they had played each other back in October, as you had mentioned. And I was just it's interesting to talk about this because, yeah, Kyler Murray has guaranteed money right now with the Oakland Athletics. So for him to turn away, possibly get drafted, and possibly lose that money, it's a super tough decision for him, and it has effect on not just the A's, but obviously the NFL teams, and in this case, the Arizona Cardinals, just based off what Kingsbury did say. But yeah, I'm not really sure what to think about this, just because obviously Kyler Murray put up phenomenal numbers this year, but he only had, I believe it was one start before this year, and that was because Baker Mayfield got suspended at the start of a game last year. So you're kind of putting this in similar situation as Mitch Trubisky. Now, Mitch Trubisky has shown huge strides this year, but I don't think Kyler Murray's going to be able to make those huge strides, and I think that's because obviously he played in a big-time conference. But remember, Baker Mayfield, when he did play in that conference, also had multiple years under his belt.
Yeah, you know what this reminds me of? It's back over a decade ago, Pete Carroll makes the jump from USC to the NFL and gets the job with the Seahawks, who are in the market for a safety in the first round of the draft. Now, Pete Carroll at USC had coached Taylor Mays, who was a physical specimen. I think he was somewhere in the range of 6'4", 6'5", and could lay the wood in the middle of the field. And Taylor Mays had every indication he was going to be the guy for the Seahawks in the middle of the first round. Pete Carroll was going to pick him. Pete Carroll was a mentor to him and had counseled him on how to prepare for the draft and getting ready. Well, what did Pete Carroll do? He didn't take Taylor Mays. He went and he took Earl Thomas. It's one thing to hype a guy up when you're a college coach and you have a lot of respect for their game and you're trying to make other people interested in them. It's another thing when it's your team and it's you on the line and it's your first-round pick.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, and looking at this situation, Ellie, I was reading your mock draft earlier on the Knock Money Football website. You want to tell us who you have Arizona picking right now if in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people were surprised about this, but I had them going with Kelvin Harmon, the wide receiver out of North Carolina State. And I was derided for this one on Twitter. They said, no, there's no way. They'll go with a defensive lineman somewhere in the range of Quentin Williams or Nick Bosa or something like that. And I said, hold on a second. Look what Arizona is doing. Look what they're showing you. They bring in a young quarterback last year. They brought in a receiver in the second round in Christian Kirk. They're now bringing in a head coach whose really only qualification is that he's an offensive guru. Why not go with a wide receiver who, in my judgment, is head and shoulders above the rest of the class in Kelvin Harmon? And what happens almost immediately afterwards as the story comes out? Well, the Cardinals are considering trading Josh Rosen to the Giants for Odell Beckham Jr. Now, not to say that it's going to happen, but I think it's a really good indication of what their priorities are, especially with Larry Fitzgerald potentially on his way out. They are going to try to build this offense around whoever the new quarterback is. And I don't think it's out of the question that they go with a guy like Kelvin Harmon or like A.J. Brown or like one of these top receivers at the high point in the draft to go and do this and to build an offense that can compete with the likes of the Rams and the Seahawks in that division.
Yeah, just when I read that, I'll be honest with you, I was shocked when I first read this as well. But then I was kind of thinking about it, I'm like, this team has been known for defense. They've been a good defensive team. Obviously, they took a step back this year. But that offense with Rosen just didn't gel. And you have to remember, Larry Fitzgerald's a Hall of Fame receiver, and he was inconsistent this year. David Johnson, we really didn't see him do too much this year. He was inconsistent. They need to get some more playmakers on that offense. So after thinking about it, it made sense going with him, the receiver out of NC State after looking everything over. And it's just hard to see it just because this is such a defensive-heavy draft. There are so many good defensive players, but there are also some underrated wide receivers. So I definitely, after reading it, I can see them doing this. What I could really see them doing, though, I could see them trading out of the first pick because they don't want to, obviously, if they know they can get him maybe 5 or 6 slots back or even a couple slots back, I think you can get a lot in return. And in that case, with this being a defensive-heavy draft, you can get the receiver you want, and then you can also get some defensive playmakers possibly in the second or third round.
Yeah, I think that would be the obvious choice, I think, too, would be to trade out of there if you have a guy that isn't super hyped as one of the top 3 picks, which I, in my opinion, don't believe he is. So, Ellie, sorry to cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, I was just saying there's precedent for doing this too, of taking a guy in the top 5, 6 at receiver who transforms the franchise. You got Julio Jones in Atlanta was the 6th pick. AJ Green, who goes to Cincinnati in I believe it was the top 5 picks. And then that franchise immediately becomes a perennial playoff contender where I think they make the playoffs. And granted, they didn't win in the first round, but the Dalton to Green connection got him there 4 or 5 years in a row. Calvin Johnson, I remember, was the #1 overall pick for the Lions. And, granted, they had their struggles, but he definitely eased the transition for Matthew Stafford coming into that team. And so I look at a team like the Cardinals. I think they're in the market for a #1, whether that's with a high pick in the draft or whether that's they go out and make a trade for it or try to see what the free agent market yields. I think you're going to see some changes on the offensive side of the ball. Now, at the same time, I was not a big Josh Rosen fan going into the draft last year. I actually differed strongly from pretty much the entire consensus, and I said Josh Rosen is no more than a 3rd-round pick. He's a spot starter in the league. I still don't feel any differently about that. I thought his struggles this year were indicative of some massive flaws that he had in his game in college. But I look at the Cardinals going forward, and I think there are reasons for optimism, given what they're trying to show you. Hey, we are willing to go toe-to-toe with teams like the Chiefs and the Rams and just score.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and they do need to make some strides on offense. And hiring Cliff Kingsbury, although it's kind of a shock, makes sense if you're looking to improve that offense. But Ryan, we didn't hear your touch on the head coaching fill-in. So what kind of stood out to you in the most recent hires?
Well, one thing that I'm just going to talk about real quick, which is Adam Gase going to the Jets, switching over from the Miami Dolphins to another AFC East team. I think that's really interesting. You don't see that very often with coaches shifting within their own division. He didn't really get I would say, fair chance in Miami due to the fact that he constantly had a backup quarterback starting. Ryan Tannehill was injured a lot. He had to deal with Jay Cutler, which I don't know many teams or franchises that could be successful with Jay Cutler at quarterback. But the Cliff Kingsbury pickup was the most interesting thing, and obviously stood out to a lot of people as somebody who isn't necessarily qualified to be an NFL coach given his background. But I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate. They did go through the interview process with Cliff Kingsbury, so it wasn't like they just decided he was going to get the job. They must have liked what they heard from him, and it is a gamble to hire this guy, and they're going to be second-guessed if it doesn't work out. But if it does work out, we're looking at that team saying, wow, that was a big turning point in their franchise. And at this point, I don't know how much they really have to lose because they're looking for a guy that's going to transform. So any of these other coaches that, they've kind of worked their way up, do they necessarily have the ability to transform? I'm not sure, but maybe a guy who's bringing in a new system, new ideas, a different perspective could potentially do that with that franchise. But I want to get to our question of the week, Ian. So why don't you talk a little bit about what the results were of that on Twitter and Facebook?
So yeah, our question of the week basically focused on the 2 remaining open head coaching vacancies between the Dolphins and the Bengals. The question basically was, which one of those 2 is going to get filled next? Looking at Twitter, we saw that over 70% of voters said that it was going to be the Bengals to fill the job first. However, Facebook had a different reaction. Over 80% of people on Facebook said the Dolphins are going to get their head coaching vacancy filled. And we did see reports, we talked about it a little bit earlier, how the Dolphins, they're looking to hire Patriots defensive coordinator Brian Flores to be their head coach. And then the Bengals, they're looking to hire Zach Taylor from the Los Angeles Rams. So looking at the 2 possibilities here, which one do you think is a better head coaching fill for the team?
A better position, did you say?
Yeah, which one, based off of the rumors of Zach Taylor to the Bengals and Brian Flores to the Dolphins, which one of those would be a better fit?
I feel like neither, to be totally honest, just because Flores with the Patriots, we've seen Patriots coaches before leave New England and then completely flounder. Bill O'Brien is one of the few that's actually had playoff success at all. We usually see these people that work with Bill Belichick go off to other teams and not succeed. We've seen Matt Patricia this year. We've seen Josh McDaniels not succeed and then continuously come back to New England. And then with the Bengals and Taylor, we kind of touched on it earlier where it's sort of another thing where they're following the Sean McVay trend. We don't really know what kind of coach this guy's going to be because he doesn't have much experience in the NFL other than quarterbacks coach. And really, you have to wonder if he's just getting a look because he's been working with Sean McVay and he's been dealing with Jared Goff. So I don't know if either of these are really phenomenal hires. I don't think that either one of them is that great.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate because, say what you will about the Bengals, and I think that's a difficult situation there right now with you lose a lot of the stability that you had for so long. I can't imagine that Dalton is long in Cincinnati, and obviously Marvin Lewis was a staple there. But you look at the Dolphins, what a talented young roster of players in an amazing position. Because you've got guys like Laramie Tunsil, and you've got Kenyon Drake and Minkah Fitzpatrick, Mike Gesicki. This is a team that could really grow into something special. And at the same time, I think we're starting to see the tail end of the Patriot dynasty. Say what you want about Brady, but I do think he was down a little bit this year. And the Jets and the Bills are both kind of a blank slate. We don't know how Darnold or Josh Allen are going to be really going forward. So you have a tremendous opportunity right now in Miami to sort of build a roster that could be competitive for years to come. I don't know that Flores is the best pick there, but I wasn't too terribly impressed with the coaching market in general this year outside of a guy like Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, and you look at this situation, just looking at it, I was kind of surprised by both just because I felt like they got a coach that didn't fill the need that they needed for the team. Look at the Bengals, for example. They're looking to hire a coach that could be another next Sean McVay. But we also have to remember they're weak. They were rated as one of the worst defenses in the NFL. They needed to get a defensive-minded coach, in my opinion, because when Andy Dalton was healthy, this offense was looking pretty solid this year. When AJ Green was healthy, Tyler Boyd had a huge year for them. Tyler Eifert was playing well until he got injured, and Joe Mixon put up over 1,000 yards. I believe he was top 5 in the league in rushing this year. Then you look at the Dolphins; they have a lot of great pieces on the defensive side of the football, but they never really had enough solid chemistry on the offensive side of the football. You really don't know who Ryan Tannehill is going to throw the ball to. Some weeks it's Kenny Stills, some weeks it's Devontae Parker, some weeks it's an unknown guy we never heard of before. Kenyon Drake had a decent season, but there are also times where they favored Frank Gore, who's towards the end of his career. So I think they needed to go for an offensive-minded coach so they can get all those offensive pieces to gel together. Now, let's continue with the Dolphins talk while we're at it here. So based off of the possible coaching hire, there are also reports that based off of the 2020 NFL draft class, which is expected to be a quarterback draft-heavy class, that we might see the Dolphins rebuild, and who knows what the rebuild possibly struggle a lot going into this next season. So in this case, with the new coaching hire and possibly looking for a new quarterback, does this all make sense for the Dolphins?
I don't know. I think it's always dangerous when you're thinking more than a year out, especially at the quarterback position based on potential of guys. I mean, we've gone through this with Matt Barkley. We've gone through this with Christian Hackenberg just because of play. We've gone through it with Brad Kaya, if you want to keep it in the city of Miami. Just because a quarterback is looking like, the surest of the sure things 1 year, they could completely fall off the radar the next year and be a player you wouldn't want to touch in the draft. And so I look at this now with Miami. And yeah, maybe it makes sense to not touch the quarterback position this year in the draft and go get a stopgap guy, whether that's like a Teddy Bridgewater or Joe Flacco or something along those lines. But at the same time, I'm not sure that I'm so totally confident hanging my hat on one of these guys who possibly maybe will have another good year and then we'll be in a position to draft them.
Yeah, Ryan, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, if you look at where they are now, they still have Ryan Tannehill. He's been okay when he's not hurt. I believe he did actually take them to the playoffs, but Matt Moore ended up starting that game. So he's a guy who does have some talent. When you look at the quarterbacks coming up in the draft, I'm not sure that there's anybody that really, leaps out at you and says the Dolphins have to go get that guy. Do you think that they are actually looking ahead to potentially trying to at some point draft Trevor Lawrence?
I don't know that they would wait for Trevor Lawrence, but I think they would give some strong consideration to guys like Justin Herbert, who went back to school. Tua Tagovailoa is going to be eligible at that point. There are a few quarterbacks who I think you could look at in the 2020 class that if they declared right now would be presumptive first-round picks. But, I mean, like I said before, we've been to this rodeo with a lot of QBs and a few off games, and all of a sudden, as an example, Jarrett Stidham is no longer anywhere near the first-round conversation. So I don't think that we can fairly project who's it going to be for next year. You know, we can try and we'll put out mock drafts and we'll do the whole thing for 2020, but it's way too early to tell.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that case. And like you had said, some of these quarterbacks that are rated to be first-round picks this year obviously could easily tail off. I remember Matt Barkley, for example, a couple years ago when he came back to school. I was a huge fan of him when he played at USC. I'm like, this guy's going to be a great quarterback in the NFL. I can't wait to see him go off this year. And then they had like a 500 season or so. And you look at that, that was kind of similar when we saw from Sam Darnold until he got drafted. He put up a huge first year when he came in relief and brought that team to a Rose Bowl. And then we saw him step back a little bit, but because he still had all that upside, it still kept him as a first-round pick, a top 3 pick. But we can easily see this with a guy like a Justin Herbert. We could see like a guy like Tua at Alabama. Easily could happen, and I don't know if I would necessarily fall into the plans for this for the Dolphins, just because if you are looking to rebuild and try and improve your offense, then why would you hire a defensive-minded coach?
I mean, they could go the defensive route, though, and just try to build up that defense. Like, we see that, too, it seems like the Bears this year. That offense is still not in the place that you wanted to be for Chicago, but Matt Nagy's got that defense playing well enough to win a lot of games. And if you look traditionally at some of the ways the teams that won Super Bowls, the Ravens, both of the years they won the Super Bowl had a solid defense. Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in the day in the 2000s had a great defense. So defense is something that you can still try to build around. And as Ellie mentioned, they have some young playmakers on the defense. So that could be the way that you want to go. And you could put someone in there like a Joe Flacco who has actually won a Super Bowl before. You could even go with an Eli Manning, and you could try to make some sort of run by building up that defense, and you could suddenly become a championship contender with one of those older veteran quarterbacks.
I'll tell you what I think the best fit for Eli Manning is. Miami would be fine, but I would think he goes to Denver. I mean, he already saw his brother go there and win a Super Bowl and kind of his swan song. So the family, I would imagine, is comfortable with the organization. He's got a lot of similarities to John Elway, Eli Manning does, in the way that they approach their draft process. Elway refused to play for the team that drafted him first overall, I believe, is the Baltimore Colts, and forced his trade the same way that Manning did with the Chargers. So I think he would go into a situation there that he's familiar with from a personal standpoint. They've got a good roster. Courtland Sutton is a receiver now who I think is going to blossom into a number 1 in his second year. So I look at the Broncos as a team where it would make the most sense for Manning to go to. But Miami would be fine too.
But you want to talk direct comparisons with your brother, who he's already compared to all the time. Do you really want to go to the exact place where Peyton won a Super Bowl and then have a chance of not winning the Super Bowl and again being compared as the guy who just wasn't as good as his brother in some regard? I know he has more Super Bowl. Oh, he has equal Super Bowls now, doesn't he? So he could go there and then not do anything, and it sort of be an even more lackluster way to end his career, just kind of following in the footsteps of Peyton again.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what does happen in regards to that. And yeah, that the whole situation with Eli Manning is kind of intriguing too, just because they're going to have questions at their quarterback position that they might try to look at this year. But that's just something that's going to be talked about, I would say, over the next couple of months before we get to the draft in the spring. But let's move on to another team that could possibly be in the rebuilding stages soon, and that has to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. We did hear reports this week that owner Art Rooney had said that he doesn't really envision seeing Antonio Brown coming back to the Pittsburgh or staying with the Steelers beyond this season. Ryan, we've talked about before. We can get it's good that we have a guest on here to get Ellie's take on this as well. But Is this legit going to be the end of Antonio Brown as a Steeler?
You're just so shocked that you couldn't actually get the words out is probably what it was. But I'll say this again. I said last week, if you would have said 2 years ago that in a matter of 2 years, there's a strong possibility that Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown would be gone from that organization, I would have said that that's crazy. But if you look at it, Antonio Brown is starting to get up there in age a little bit. You've seen his production go down, and you've seen Juju Smith-Schuster's production go up, and now Antonio Brown is becoming sort of a distraction in the locker room while we already have the Le'Veon Bell distraction going on in Pittsburgh. So Ben Roethlisberger, also at the tail end of his career, it could potentially be time to just get rid of this former generation of stars in Pittsburgh and bring in some new ones. I'm sure that Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown still have plenty of good years left, but if they're going to be problems in the locker room and the Steelers think they have guys up and coming that can fill their shoes in James Conner and Juju Smith-Schuster, then I don't see any reason as to why Antonio Brown would still be with the organization next year when they could get some amazing trade packages for him.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Ryan, you hit it on the nail on the head when you talked about Smith-Schuster. The Steelers have sort of a way that they go about doing this where they establish a guy as a real true number one receiver, and then they find another player to take over the load. So they've gone from Plaxico Burress to Santonio Holmes to Emmanuel Sanders, now to Antonio Brown.
It's
and
sort
they
of
do
like
this
Sith in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, they cycle through receivers in a similar way the Patriots do it. All these teams at this level, the guys at the skill positions outside of the quarterback are they're interchangeable. So James Conner the same way at running back. I don't think the Steelers are in full-fledged rebuild mode yet. They might not even have to get to that point because however many years you have left with Ben Roethlisberger, you spent a mid-round pick on Mason Rudolph, who I believe could be a talented quarterback, could be a starter in this league. And then on the other side of the ball, I think they're probably just a cornerback away from being a playoff team. I mean, I think they finished the season somewhere in the 9-6-1 range. I think that was the final record. And so if you get another player or two and you're able to cycle through guys like Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell the way that you have over the years, Steelers find ways to do this. I mean, at one point it was, what are they going to do after Jerome Bettis leaves? And they figured it out.
Yeah, just looking at it, I like the point of, obviously, if you lose Brown, that's obviously a huge production you lose. But they do have upside on this team. We saw what James Conner could do this year with no Le'Veon Bell. Even some of Jalen Samuels when Conner was out. We've seen Juju Smith-Schuster step up and become a Pro Bowl caliber player. We've seen strides from Vance McDonald and Jesse James. They have the pieces on offense, even without Antonio Brown, be a good team. Look at the defense, they have some pieces as well, and they might be like a piece or two away on the defensive side of the football. They have a couple of guys that are getting up there, but they also have younger guys on that team. A huge fan of TJ Watt for that team. Definitely have the talent. It's just something that, Ellie, you made a great point in what were they going to do when they lost Jerome Bettis. Well, when he was starting to get towards the end of his career, I believe it was Willie Parker was the guy who came into play when he was still on the team, and then we saw him obviously continue when he was off the team, and then obviously Le'Veon Bell gets in play later on.
Rashard Mendenhall in there for a little bit.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. So you're kind of seeing a little bit of that right now with Juju Smith-Schuster kind of taking over the realms of Antonio Brown. Obviously, it's a different case because you got a guy that doesn't really feel like he wants to be on the team compared to retirement. But they've kind of been through this before, just not the same ideal situation, but like similar wise with the type of players that have stepped up. We're starting to see that a little bit. So even if they were to get rid of Antonio Brown, and obviously it looks like they will be losing Le'Veon Bell as well, this team can still be at least a wild card team, in my opinion, even with Ben Roethlisberger possibly towards the end of his career. And then even when a different quarterback takes over this team, they can still be a solid team. Not sure we could see them out of the playoffs for a couple years, but it's not like we're going to see them out for like 7 to 10 years.
No, and I'll tell you, the Steelers get
go ahead.
playoffs. Oh, sorry. No, Ryan, go ahead.
Oh, I was actually going to agree with something you said already, Ellie, and that you mentioned the Patriots. If you look at the Patriots over the past 2 decades, which names do you really remember as stalwarts on the offense other than Tom Brady? Because they cycle through receivers and running backs more than probably any other team in the league, and you cannot really even name a star player that was there for more than 3 years at any of those positions, other than maybe like Gronkowski, Randy Moss, or Edelman. Otherwise, they had Deion Branch, they had Troy Brown, Corey Dillon was involved for a little bit. They have more running backs than you could ever even remember playing on those Super Bowl winning teams. So they've proven that you don't need stars on the perimeter, you don't need stars in the backfield other than your quarterback and just a solid team overall to win championships.
Yeah, and I was going to say with the Steelers, I mean, all you've got to do is just get in the postseason, get a wild card, or win the division. Because I'll tell you what, when the temperature starts to drop, a cold weather team like Pittsburgh with a wily veteran like Ben Roethlisberger, I don't care who he has around him, that's a team you don't want to play in January.
Yeah, definitely make a good point there because look at last year, for example, even though they lost to the Jacksonville Jaguars, they got down early in that game, but it's a cold place to play in at Heinz Field, and they can come back into the games. We've seen it in regular season, and we've seen it at times in postseason too. So you do make a point. They get to the playoffs. They're a tough team to beat just because of the fact that you put them in any sort of weather situation, and they can play through it. So definitely a good point on that as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens as we do get towards the NFL draft. If we do see some sort of trade with Antonio Brown to get some draft picks for this year, definitely something I think the Steelers would love to do, especially with this being a defensive-heavy draft. But we are getting towards the end of the show. And I do want to make a point that we did already make our picks for this week, but I do want to mention to Ryan that he is currently trailing in our upset standings, who's going to be upset. But both the picks he made this week are actually currently underdog picks. So if Ryan gets these wins, he'll go 2-0 in upset picks and possibly get closer and closer to catching.
That's what it's all about. That's all I care about. That's why I did it.
Yeah, so since we are towards the end of the show, typically we do talk about fantasy football. And obviously with the fantasy season over, we've just touched on some random topics these last couple weeks. And this week, I wanted to touch about a topic that I read earlier in the season. If you don't follow Matthew Berry and read some of his articles, definitely do recommend it. But there was an article during his love-hate column that talked about a league that he started to develop. It's a fantasy football league, and he called it a vampire league. So basically, what happens in this league, I've talked about it a little bit on the show before, but what happens in the league is basically it's a normal fantasy league, but when it comes to the draft, everybody in your draft drafts except for one team, and that's the vampire team. So basically what happens in that case is after the draft's done, the person that didn't draft, they can go to the waiver wires and pick up any players they want. And the thing with it is when it comes to waiver wire during the season, they're the only team that can use the waiver wire. So if you need to pick someone up, they're the only team that gets to do it. And then what happens when it comes to games is when they play, if they win, they can steal any star player that is in the lineup that week. So you can make a trade with anyone you had in your lineup for someone that they have in their lineup. So after reading through this and seeing or envisioning how this would play out, would you guys what would your thoughts be if you were asked to be in one of these leagues?
I think Matthew Berry has too much time on his hands developing new fantasy football techniques.
Yeah, I look at that and I think, wow, it would be really fun to be the vampire. I don't know about being one of the other 11, though. It seems like you're just going through the season focused on this one team. I like a league where everybody's in it and you're able to go through the waiver wire. I think I would feel like if I won as one of the other 11, whatever, it's just a normal league. But if I were the vampire, I'd be pretty hyped about it.
Couldn't they do it where almost pink slip style where everybody is essentially the vampire? Like you all draft your team, but as soon as basically wager 2 players. Like say, I'm going to wager this player and then the other team has to wager a player of comparative value. I think that would be interesting because even if it was a team that wasn't, or like a player that wasn't very good that got wagered, it would just be kind of fun to be able to like compile players from other teams if you wanted, or have some sort of like little sort of trophy for beating a team each week. So I think there's a way to make it so that everybody has some sort of even playing ground there.
Yeah, and when I did read it, I thought it was like super intriguing, something that I would want to do. But when it comes to playing that team every week, you have to question how you're going to play your lineup. Because if you think you can win, then obviously you play your best starters. But if there's any doubt that you think that you could lose, it kind of makes you consider, well, maybe I should just forfeit this week and play my bench. So
just
that way,
put nobody in the lineup.
I think the rules of the league was you had to have a spot filled no matter what, but just fill it in with any of your backups, and maybe if you have a guy that's inconsistent, maybe drop him, and that way when you do lose, he gets a guy, and maybe he gets that guy that you didn't want anyway. But I think it would be intriguing to participate in one of these leagues. I think it would we'd see a lot of stress and a lot of drama because waiver wire is a huge thing in fantasy football, and the fact that only one team has control of the whole waiver wire is just something that I think a lot of people would, let's see, what's the word? They'd probably be disgusted by it just because the fact that they can't pick up anyone.
That would be annoying. You're right about that.
But, yeah, we are at the end of the show. So before we do go, Ryan, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, make sure to give us a like on Twitter. I believe it's at Touchdown Tuesday, and give us a like on Facebook. And also give Ellie a like, too, on his Twitter account, which is at Knock Football. Got that right, Ellie?
Yeah, it's NACH Football. Guys, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciated being here, and conversation was great. Conference championship weekend's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no problem, Ellie. Do you want to tell the viewers about your blog website and what you have coming out on there going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So we specialize in NFL draft and college football analysis. So now that the college football season's over, we're going to be getting heavy into the draft coverage. Ian mentioned before about mock draft 1.0 that we put up. We're going to keep putting up more mock drafts. We've got a big board that we're updating as well. And scouting reports are coming too. So make sure you follow us on Twitter. We're going to be getting all the draft coverage coming up, and it's really going to be a fun draft season. So I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. Again, we want to thank you, Ellie, for coming on to the show this week. Also, again, make sure to listen to us each week on either iTunes, Google Play, or Spreaker. Then, like Ryan had mentioned, make sure to give us a like on Facebook and Twitter as well. Look out for our question of the week, and then we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a good night and enjoy the rest of your week.